AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Brett Johnson with you here on a Tuesday afternoon. And as usual on Tuesdays, we are joined by Patrick Coolican, who is the editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Reformer. As today we are going to be talking about a couple of races for state legislature in Minnesota and how a couple of Republican candidates could be running into some hot water from some past positions that they've had on issues. And then we are also going to be talking about possible efforts from the Republican National Committee to file lawsuits to stop election laws in Minnesota as part of a possible Stop the Steal effort coming up here this fall after the general election. So lots to get to today. Let's bring Patrick on. Patrick, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So let's start off talking about a couple of these races in the state legislature and head on over to House District 35B in the North Metro, which includes Coon Rapids and some surrounding communities. Now, this seat is significant because District 35B is largely a 50-50 district between Republicans and Democrats, and this cycle, it's an open seat. Now, two people are running for it, including Coon Rapids City Council member Carrie Rauer, who is the DFLer, and she'll be running against Steve Pape, who is the Republican. But it's Pape whose record and past words are currently under scrutiny, as Pape identifies himself as very much of a social moderate and avoids issues like abortion during most of the interviews he's given in the past. But past comments have resurfaced showing that he holds more right-leaning views on abortion, which we'll get to in just a few seconds. So can you provide us a little more background here on Steve Pape's political career and how he's positioned himself as a social moderate while making a lot of very strong anti-abortion rights statements over the years?
Yeah, a remarkable situation where the abortion issue for a long time, decades, had been probably a net positive for Republicans because it so motivated single-issue voters. It really drove a lot of volunteerism and money and turnout amongst voters who cared solely about that issue. And what a turnabout it's been since the Dobbs decision in 2022, where now that abortion has been banned in so many states and highly restricted in others, it's become such a more salient issue and a losing issue for Republicans across the country, and certainly here in Minnesota. So you see a candidate like Pape, he's trying to avoid it. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't put it on his website. But there's still that strong anti-abortion principle for someone like him and most Republicans. And so in his campaign kickoff, he was open about a couple different things. One, that he would like for us to restrict abortion, and two, it was going to be very hard to get there and was going to be incremental and years long. And he said some things that were pretty inflammatory in the process, and including that in order to restrict abortion, a number of Minnesotans were going to have to either leave the state or up and die. I'm paraphrasing. He said a whole lot of pro-abortion people need to go die or leave the state. So that's what he said. Interestingly, we asked him about this, reporter Chris Ingram, and he first sort of denied saying it and accused the reporter of infanticide or favoring infanticide. Sorry. And then when we sent him the audio, then he says he doesn't really remember making the statements and blah, blah, blah. So it was an interesting back and forth as the reporter confronted the candidate with this evidence of his views, which he's now clearly afraid to broadcast because it's such a losing issue for Republicans in these kind of swing districts.
What I find interesting, too, is that I think he really kind of let the cat out of the bag in terms of what his strategy might be on tackling abortion issues should he reach the state legislature, because he very upfront acknowledges the fact that they're not going to be able to immediately get, let's say, a constitutional amendment passed in Minnesota that would ban abortion. He very much knows that it's going to take incremental change to, well, make our laws more towards where he would want to be on the abortion issue. And I think that kind of shows how he would govern, and perhaps even the strategy of Republicans, where they might not say directly, well, we're for having a constitutional amendment that would ban abortion in Minnesota. They know that it's going to take incremental change, and he largely admits this out front, which I think could be largely a strategy of what many of these supposed moderate Republicans would do should they get to the state legislature.
Yeah, they have to take a whole new tack. I mean, this is exactly what anti-abortion legislators were doing before Dobbs, because Roe didn't allow them to just to completely outlaw abortion, and Minnesota has its own Roe decision, Doe v. Gomez. So they were working incrementally, but they were having some success. There were restrictions on abortion until they were completely stripped from the law, first by the judiciary and then later by the legislature. And so that is the approach, the incremental approach they're gonna have to take. And I'm somewhat sympathetic to a politician who knows that an issue is a political loser, but wants to keep pushing on it. I mean, I'm certainly in that camp with gun control, for instance. I mean, I'm a strong advocate for gun control, but at the moment, people like me are very much in a tough spot because it's not necessarily popular with a broad coalition of voters, and you've got the Second Amendment in the way, and you've got to really incrementally move on that issue. Of course, a key difference here with Pape is that he's trying to be there's some subterfuge here. He doesn't want the public to know his true views on abortion, and thanks to the reformer, we all do now.
Yeah, absolutely. We do thank you for your good work on that, because we heard anecdotally from other people just around the metro area that oftentimes you will get people kind of knocking on doors saying, well, I'm not really a Republican or a Democrat, when they are the Republican candidate, and they do sometimes try to hide their views. So definitely good work there to uncover what at least in this case, Steve Pape's true views appear to be on abortion. Want to move on to another race in the state legislature. Let's go on over to the Senate side, because in the upcoming November elections, only one Senate seat is going to be up, but it's significant. We are having a special election in Senate District 45, which will determine control in the state Senate, as we have Republican candidate Kathleen Folk, who is one of the candidates running for the seat, and she has come under scrutiny for receiving a homestead property tax break on a property she does not currently live in, which is located also outside the district that she hopes to represent. This, along with her considerable wealth and personalized loans to her campaign, have raised a lot of questions about her campaign against her DFL opponent, which is former state senator Ann Johnson Stewart. So let's talk about Kathleen Folk a little bit more. Can you explain how she was able to claim a property tax or a homestead property tax break on a property she doesn't live in? I'm curious, what are the legal mechanisms behind this?
Yeah, I want to emphasize this is entirely legal, what she has done. She lives in her district in a $4.9 million house in Tonka Bay. The Senate district is kind of the well-heeled western suburbs. And as you noted, it's a special election. The Senate is not on the ballot this year. The winner of this special election will control the state Senate. So it's a huge, important battle. And so the Republican candidate, she lives in Tonka Bay. She has a townhome in Plymouth, which is not in the district. She has a relative living there. The law does allow you to claim the homestead exemption, which essentially just reduces your property tax bill. You're allowed to claim that exemption for a property in which you've put a relative. In this case, it's her aging mother. Certainly legal. Plenty of rich people have good tax lawyers and accountants and financial professionals who advise them to make these kinds of moves, and they can save. In this case, I think it was like $6,500. But certainly a curious look for a candidate for office who, in addition to the $4.9 million home in Tonka Bay, she's got the townhome where she puts her her mother. They've got a crazy house in Florida that was featured in a magazine that I know we all read religiously called Gulf Shore Life. And so it just kind of looks like, gee, I mean, you know, the $6,500. I mean, how important was it? And so her response was interesting. She said it just calls attention to the high cost of everyday goods, which she said is hitting seniors especially hard. I guess she's referring to her mother because they often lived on fixed incomes. I mean, of course, in this case, she bought the home for her mother, and she's the one getting the tax break. It's not her mother. So it's not exactly, again, entirely legal. Lots of people do it, but it's certainly, to us, it was interesting that she took this significant tax break on the townhome that she doesn't live in, is not in her district.
And as you brought up, this is perfectly legal for her to do, and it's not like she was necessarily doing this because she's pinching pennies. I think it just kind of shows that we were kind of talking about when you're a very wealthy person, you probably have an accountant that handles a lot of your finances, handles a lot of your taxes, and whoever her accountant was probably recommended that she take this credit, which is perfectly legal, but it does kind of, as we were talking about, play into this idea that she could be very much of kind of an out-of-touch, very wealthy elitist, being that, well, she does own these properties. She is also... her husband used to be he was the former XL CEO, which does make her very much kind of an easy target. So I'm curious how Democrats might be using this in this race, although this probably is an uphill climb for Republicans to even win this Senate district out in District 45.
Yeah, this is very much a probably at one time, not even that long ago, it was a Republican district, but since Donald Trump has driven so many wealthy professionals into the arms of the Democrats. And so I think that's the case with this district. And you noted that her husband is formerly the CEO of the electric utility. And I think we'll be hearing more about that because she's received a lot of support in the 22 campaign. And we haven't checked this time. This time we are currently at the moment checking her campaign finance for all of the financial support she's received from employees of XL, the electric utility, and their allies, and voters in the district. I'm sure are going to be told about their Republican candidates' ties to the electric utility, where they send off their electric bill and gas bill checks every month with a grimace. Something else worth pointing out here is how important both of course, the Public Utility Commission, but also the legislature is to the stock price of a company like XL. Her husband is no longer the CEO, but I think we understand where her background lies, and XL has business before the legislature every single year. Extremely important to the company's stock price. And and also it's not like, I think we have a certain amount of respect and admiration for entrepreneurs and companies that make cool things. The electric monopoly, I'm sure what they do is, I know what they do is important, but I don't think it's a very complex entrepreneurial business model. It's charge whatever the state will allow them to charge, and then collect the money and keep the lights on.
Yeah, no matter how important it is, as you were kind of alluding to, it's not necessarily the most popular company with many Minnesotans, especially when it comes, let's say, wintertime, and you're trying to heat your home. XL, yeah, not always the most popular company with Minnesotans. I want to talk about one more story with you, and that has to do with some possible efforts by Republicans in Minnesota to cause election, I guess we'll call it shenanigans, post-November. So during an August 1st GOP meeting, just to provide you a little background, two prominent Republicans said the Republican National Committee plans to file a lawsuit seeking an injunction on a number of Minnesota election laws. Now, there was a meeting between State Senator Mark Coran and Minnesota Republican National Committee person, A.K. Kamara, who discussed taking legal action against these laws. So I'm curious, what specific laws passed during the 2023 and 24 sessions are they possibly going to be focused on to cause some election havoc, well, post-November here in Minnesota?
They're real cagey about it with Dina Winter, the reporter. So it's really not clear. And honestly, I mean, we've seen the history of the Republican Party in the state really not having its act together. So I don't really know how much credence to put into this. But there were some legislative changes in 23, 24 that I suppose they could try to litigate. One of them would be automatic registration. Another would be that no longer incarcerated people are allowed to vote immediately and don't have to wait until their supervision, like parole or probation, is done. And then, so those are the two main ones. I'm unclear why they think that they would have any chance at litigation. That the former felon voting one has already been litigated here. So I'm unclear on the automatic registration. They've made claims that some undocumented people got absentee ballots. I've never seen the evidence of that. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see. But certainly, I think given what happened in 2020 and what we know is happening in other states right now, we actually ran a story to this effect about Wisconsin and Michigan from our partner at State Line. It's something to be concerned about. I do feel confident that Minnesota's election system is so solid and well run, and I don't think this election is going to be particularly close, at least as far as the presidential goes. I think Republicans would be lucky if it were as close as 2020, but it's not going to be one of these razor thin margins where this kind of thing could be really disruptive. But it is illustrative of all of the efforts around the country to potentially disrupt the voting process and then also the certification process.
Yeah, because oftentimes when we talk about Republicans trying to prevent elections from being certified, we think about states like Arizona or Wisconsin or Michigan. We don't often think about Minnesota, even though Republicans could possibly be trying some tactics. Final question for you on this would be, what's the response been, at least from DFLers or at least other election officials? Do they seem very concerned about many of these threats? Or, as you said, do we have largely such a solid system that these are probably not going to go anywhere, even post-November?
Well, I think part of the concern was just not knowing what they're talking about. We had some reporting that indicated there were going to be some kind of litigation. I mean, we have them quoted talking about seeking injunctions, but then they just won't tell us what they're talking about. And so I think maybe that's the biggest concern, is just the not knowing.
Yeah, well, we might not know until after November, and who knows, maybe if it's that much of a lopsided election in Minnesota, they might not even try anything anyways. So we will wait and see post-election if we do see many of these Stop the Steal efforts here in Minnesota coming up in November. We have been speaking with Patrick Coolican, who is the editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Reformer. Make sure you give them a follow over at minnesotareformer.com for some of the great reporting they're doing, including, as we talked about, uncovering some past comments from Republican candidate Steve Pape that largely fly in the face of his position of being a social moderate. Again, go to minnesotareformer.com. Patrick, as always, thanks for the time today.
Always a pleasure.
All right, let's take a break and send things back over to Matt McNeil on AM 950.